It has been a while that I've been thinking about this issue for a longer period of time. Do you know that our behaviors are so essential in our life? Do you know that how we behave is so much regarded and valued by humanity? I've seen people behaving goodly. I've seen people who have been disciplining their mind day by day. I've seen people who have been doing good actions at the end of the day. And these are the people that have been praised to be good. And this has made me think a lot that the psyche of humanity really thinks that it can solve the problem of humanity when we are behaving well, when we do good actions, and that is the time that now we're fine. And this has to do with the law. I want to talk about the denominations today, but I think that in every denomination, in every religion, there are laws that are being adhered to, the laws that are being followed day by day. Have you ever thought of asking this question, that in the spiritual realm, how do we define the term sin? What is sin? What is our understanding of sin? You will be surprised by being told that sin has to do with the breaking of the rules. It has to do with the breaking of the law. And this is the human psyche that defines sin in this context. That sin has to do with the breaking of the law, despite of which law that is being spoken here. But a majority believe that sin has to do with the breaking of a certain rule that is set. That is why it's so easy for a person to be penalized. That's why we have so many rules governing our moral behaviors. That is why the government has got a constitution. That is why we have some laws that are in place to guide us. In every country, I believe so, there are laws that anybody who goes against these laws has to be in a real problem. Now, what about in our Christian life? That's what I want to talk about today. How do we define sin in this essence? Does sin has to do with our behavior? Does it mean that when we behave so good, that is the time that now we're no longer sinners? Does it mean that now when we do not break a certain rule, then we're at bars of being good people and not regarded as sinners? What if I consent and say that sin has to do with the breaking of a rule? That significantly has to affect our understanding about righteousness. Then righteousness has to do with obedience to a rule. That is why I've been thinking about this issue today, and I want us to see on the biblical principle what is the nature of sin that is being spoken, that Christ is teaching us. Now, if you ask a question, if you ask so many Christians today, what is sin? They immediately take you to the Bible and they read you the verse that I'm sure that you're so familiar with. This is 1 John 3 verse 4, which says that whosoever committeth sin transgresseth also the law, for sin is the transgression of the law. Now here, it clearly indicates that transgression of the law is what that is called sin. So in order for any person, for any open-minded person to commit a sin, then he has to actually break a certain law. I'm not denying that this verse gives us a true description of sin. I'm not denying that, because it gives us a description of what is sin. But accepting 1 John 3 verse 4, it enables you and me to understand of a kind of a behavior which is unacceptable to God. However, I want you to realize that this is not all that the Bible says concerning sin. This is not all the Bible says concerning sin. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this, that this is not only the understanding of sin in which we find in the Word of God. Because if we were to accept this verse as being a comprehensive definition of what sin is, then this has to depend majorly upon our actions, upon our behavior, how we behave, how we act. Then we'll have to limit sin to our behavior. But there are so many places in the Bible whereby the Bible teaches us that there is more unto sin than the actions. That is what I want us to talk about. What am I saying? There is more than the wrong actions. That sin is more than the wrong action. That sin is more than the breaking of the law. There is more to this topic that I want us to illustrate about. Now, sin has to go deeper than what we do. Because I've seen so many Christians insist that a person does not commit sin unless he breaks a law. I've seen so many of them say this way. Therefore, that a person can no longer be a sinner unless he has to be a law breaker. Then these people, they seem to believe that in order to solve the problem of sin, a person simply needs to start keeping the law. But anyone who is very honest, any person who is so open-minded will tell you that this doesn't work in such a manner. Now, there is a verse that I want us to think about. There is this verse that you and me can meditate upon it. And this verse can enable us to reason together and go deeper to the understanding of sin and not limit sin to just actions and behaviors. In the book of Mark, chapter 7, verse 18, we read through 23, Jesus is making very interesting statements here. And I want to read as it says, "And he said unto them, Are you without understanding also? Do you not perceive that whatsoever thing from without enters into the man, it cannot defile him?" Verse 19, "Because it enters not into his heart, but into his belly, and goeth out into the draught, purging all meats." 20, "As he said, that which cometh out of the man, that which comes out of the man, that has to defile the man. For from within, out of the heart of man, proceed evil thoughts." And he gives examples of the evil thoughts: adulteries, fornication, murderers, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, fullness. All these evil things come from within, and these are the things that defile the man. I want to majorly talk about verse 21 and verse 22 because it has a striking statement here. Here Jesus says that our sinful actions, they start from somewhere, and that somewhere has to be from within us. So before somebody has to perform an action, before someone has to do or to perform this action, he or she has to think about it. So before you commit an action, already in the mind you have to give it a thought. That is why I normally think in this manner. I want us to be very open-minded. Before somebody steals, he or she has to have a thought about it. So the actions committed, they're just a fulfillment of the thoughts of that person had already planned in the mind. So the actions just fulfill what was in the mind. So before somebody goes there and does something, he or she had already thought about that thing already in the mind. That means had already stolen, had already done it in the mind. There is a verse that says that the one who hates his brother is a murderer. Have you ever thought about that? That before we do the actions, we first have to think about it. And those who are limiting sin to be only about the breaking, or has to be all about the breaking of the law, it has to do only with the actions and behaviors, then we're going to limit the understanding of sin. So we must have a sinful thought in our mind that our actions are not the problem. When you think about this critically, you see that the actions are not the problem, because the action is just a fulfillment of what had already been thought in our mind. So the action is not a problem. So the problem then has to be the thoughts that produce the actions. The problem has to be the thoughts that produce the actions. Now then I need to ask another question. What is this that produces the thoughts? If the action is not the problem has to be the thoughts. So where do the thoughts come from? Now, in verse 21 of Mark chapter 7 verse 18 that we are reading, in verse 21 says this way: out of the hearts of men proceed evil thoughts. So it is true that the actions, they come from the thoughts. That one we can agree perfectly about that. But the thoughts themselves, where do they come from? They proceed from the heart. So I'm talking about the heart. The heart refers to the mind. I'm not talking about the conscious mind, but here I'm just talking about the subconscious mind that is called the nature. I'm talking about the nature. Because this is something that is worthy for us to consider. It is not something that we can jump into conclusion and say and limit sin to only a law-breaking issue. This has to do with more than the actions. This has to do more than the thoughts. This goes deeper into our mind. This goes deeper into our nature. Then this defines who we are. This has to define us. Now, in John chapter 8, verse 31 through 34, I want us to read. John chapter 8, verse 31 to 34. It says, then said Jesus unto the Jews. Here Jesus is just addressing the Jews. And these are the Jews that believed in him. He says this way to them: if you continue in my word, then you are my disciples indeed. In verse 32, he says, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Then the Jews answered him, We are Abraham's seed, and we were never in bondage to any man. How sayest thou, you shall be made free? Jesus answered them, Very, very, I say unto you, whosoever committed sin is the servant of sin. What? That whosoever that commits sin is a servant of sin. Slaves to sin. Sin has to be the master, and the one that commits sin is a slave, and the master has to be sin. Is this what Jesus was telling these guys? That we have to trust the words of God. How can he say that sin is the master and the one that commits sin is a slave? So he has to obey to what the master tells him or her. Now, Jesus said that if you commit sin, you are a servant of sin. If this is true, then the master automatically has to be sin. And the Jews, they thought that Jesus Christ was talking about the physical bondage here. That's why they were very much quickly to respond, telling him that we are Abraham's children and we were never slaves to anybody. But Jesus stands and says that if you commit sin, anybody who has to commit sin, then there is a master that you have to obey to. And this master has to be sin. These are very striking passages that when I read, they make me think a lot. Now, Jesus describes sin to be a king, a ruling master who demands what we call obedience. Now, I'm not good in Greek, but I hear so many talk about the word slave to mean servant, to all mean about, it comes from the Greek word doulos, which it's translated literally to mean a slave, that somebody who has no choice, somebody who is dictated to behave in a certain way, which is true. Sin is the master, and the one that committed sin is a slave. So that is why we are slaves to sin. That is why by nature humanity finds themselves committing sin, and we just wonder, how are we in bed with sin? What is this that bonds us with sin? That every human being that is born of a woman, by nature, we just enjoy sinning. In 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 9, the words of Paul talking to Timothy, telling him that if you read, because I know that I want to paraphrase it, that the law is not made for a righteous man, but it is made to sinners, the whoremongers, the murderers. Talk about that. The list is very big. But the law is not meant for a righteous man. You know, I just think about these issues, and I found myself having a different perception about our understanding of the law, the purpose of the law. The righteous man is not dictated by the law. And I believe that so many people don't agree with me in this. But this is the truth. But I'm not talking about the law, but I'm talking about sin. In Romans chapter 7, verse 14, we find the similar words that Paul uses when he's describing the experience of a sinner. And a sinner is someone who is separated from God. This is a person who is carnally. This is a person who does not even subscribe to the law. This is a person who is lawlessness. And Paul talks about the experience of a person who is ruled by sin. And he says that, for we know that the law is spiritual, but I am a carnal, sold under sin. Somebody who is sold under sin, then this has to be a person who is a slave. This is a person who has no choice but to obey to the master. And earlier I've talked about the master being the sin. That for that which I do, allow not, for what I would, that do I do not. But what I hate, that I do. 16. If then I do that which I would not, he says that I consent unto the law, that it is good. Now then, it is no more I that do it, but sin that dwells in me. Listen to what Paul is saying here. He's talking about the experience of a sinner who has been in the dominion of sin. This is a person who is being ruled by the master called sin. This is the person who has no option to do good. This is the person who wants to do good, and this person finds himself that what he hates, that is what he does. When he wants to do good, he finds himself doing bad. But by the mind, he knows that the law is good, that the law which says that thou shalt not kill, the law that says thou shalt not do A, B, C, D, that it is good because it is demanding what we call good behavior. But this person cannot produce this good behavior. This is a person who is a carnal-minded person, which is called enmity with God. This is a person that the master is sin. So the master wakes up and tells you, you have to kill. You know that killing is bad, but you have no option to do what? To kill. Since you are a slave and your master is sin, the master has to rule over you. So you have no option. This is what that Paul is talking about. That sin has to go deeper to our nature. This is a condition that we have. This is a state of being that we have that enables us to break the law. And this is the condition that Christ came to deal with. No wonder, if we have to have a true understanding of sin, then this has to open the door for us to understand what is righteousness, because righteousness has to deal with a state of being that produces good, all for us to behave good. So if our nature is the problem, then our nature has to enable us to produce what we are. Our nature defines who we are. That is why we inherited a sinful nature from our father Adam. That by birth, we are naturally sinners. We're just enemies with God. That is why Christians were supposed to be born again. And when we are born again, there's a gift from God, and this is the indwelling of Christ in us. Christ in us, it changes our nature. Then by nature now, we desire good things. Now by nature, we do what the law demands for us to do. So by nature, we behave well, not that we are being dictated by the law to behave well, but we behave well because our nature has been changed. Our desire now, it has to be for us desiring to do what is good. Whatever that the law demands for us to do, now we don't kill. Now we obey our parents. Now we subscribe to what the law wants. But remember this, anyone who is born again, person who is a Christian, a born-again believer, this is not a person that is under the law. Because we have seen that the person that is under the law, this is a person that is a sinner. And the purpose of the law is to guide you, is to direct you to Jesus. And after finding Jesus now, the law ends there. The law has to end there. That's what I'm talking about. I don't want to go deeper to the part of the law, but I want to talk about how do we understand what is sin. The law, we'll do one of the many episodes about the law. It's one of the very interesting topics. But our true understanding, the principle behind sin or the nature of sin has to go deeper than the actions, deeper than the thoughts. It has to go deeper to our nature. And your nature, all our nature, defines who we are. The nature that we possess, the nature that we have, it defines who we are. If we have to possess a defined nature, if we possess a nature of Christ living, indwelling in us, then automatically we attain what we call righteousness, because the first man, Adam, was made a living soul. But the second Adam, who is Jesus Christ, was made a quickening spirit, that is a life-giving spirit, the one who gives life to us. And this life dwelling in us, it is the life of Christ living in us, which produces, because when you talk about the book of Galatians chapter 5, the fruit of the indwelling of Christ in us, love comes in, patience, humility. And he is saying that against such there is no law. Now, brethren, in Romans, we saw Paul using a statement that I'm sold under sin. And we have discovered that the person that is sold under sin has to be a slave. This is a person who has no choice what to do. This is a person who has no choice. And is only entirely the best thing this person can do is to obey his master. He is to obey the master. Whatever the master says, it has to be final in that person. Now, in verse 16, Paul says that I agree that the law is good. But in verse 17, he's talking about the enslavement. And he says, now that it is no more I that doeth it, but sin that dwells in me. These are the striking words, striking statements, that when I read these statements, I start seeing things in a different perspective. Now, this means that the nature that we possess does not need to be repaired, because our nature can never be repaired. Our nature has to change, and our nature must change, because we inherited a corrupt nature, a sinful nature from Adam, and this nature has to be changed. We don't want to solve this problem of sin by behaving well. We don't want to solve this problem of sin by behaving well, by producing good actions. But we want to solve this problem. That is why Jesus wanted to solve this problem of sin, by changing our nature. Because by changing our nature, even our thoughts will change. And the thoughts, they will just concur with our actions. So it's simple and clear as it is illustrated here. Now, why does our nature has to change? In John 3 verse 6, John says that which is born of flesh is what? Is flesh. And that which is born of the Spirit is what? Is the Spirit. We are born carnally. We are born of the flesh. And the flesh has to be with an enemy, the carnal mind. The old man that dwelleth in me, this body of sin. That's why I like so much the book of Romans chapter 7 and chapter 8 that talks about the three types of laws. We talk about that in our episodes. But that which is born of the flesh is the flesh. And that which is born of the spirit is what? Is the spirit. So we need to be born of the spirit. Because the flesh is enmity, is carnally minded. Now, if our nature has to change, then if we possess the flesh, then we behave as the flesh. If our nature has to be pertained of the spirit of Christ living in us, then we behave in a Christ-like. Then we think in a Christ-like manner. Now, are we supposed to change from the outside through good works, or we're supposed to change from the inside? Now, I want to give these two illustrations today. And these two illustrations, they will typically give us a good example of what I'm talking about. The nature of these two animals can never be avoided to be taken into consideration. Now, these two animals, one of it is a pig and the other is a cat. When I'm talking about a pig, we understand the nature of a pig. So, by nature, this pig loves enjoying walking in dirt, playing in dirt. By nature, we can't change it. That is how the pigs behave. They behave by swimming, okay, enjoying, walking in water, and making themselves so dirty. That is how they were created. That's how they are. What about the cats? By nature, these animals, these tame animals, they are very clean. There is no single day that you find a cat running into water, making himself so dirty. Then that will be a miracle. So what makes these animals behave in this kind of manner? It is because these animals, by nature, they behave that way. Have you ever had a thought? Have you ever considered this? That by nature, we, the human beings, we behave like the pigs. By nature, we, the human beings, born of Adam, by nature, we are sinners by nature. What did we do? Did we break the law? So can we define sin only by breaking the law? Then that has to be a limited way. Then that has to be a limited description of understanding the nature of sin. So this makes us to think. This makes us now, gives us a broader picture to see that our nature is the problem. That is where our nature has to be changed. Our nature is the problem. So our nature has to be changed. I want to end it here. I don't want to take so much time in explaining this, because the psyche of humanity thinks that the problem has to be solved by us being obedient to a certain law, prescribed law that is given. That if we are in bed with this law, that we keep it, then we are safe. But I want to remind you that our nature is corrupt. We love sinning because of our nature. And our nature is the problem. Not the actions, not the thoughts, but our nature must change. Now, sin goes deeper than the actions and the thoughts. Sin has to do with our nature, and our nature has to change. So how do we define sin? Is a state of being, because I'm talking about this nature, a state of being that enables us to do what? To break or to behave in a certain way. May God bless you.